So we are doing the season of nonviolence, yes, which is 24, sorry, not 24, 64, even better, practices to bring more peace and nonviolence to our world. And every day there's a theme, which you can follow along if you get a little brochure that you saw by the bulletins when you came in, or on our Facebook page. But we're doing a little side trip. Of course, it all applies, because we also have a theme of the month, and I know we're already at the end of the month, but you may have noticed where the colors on the candles is this nice spring green. Did you notice? Yes. And that's the color that we use that represents strength. The 12, one of the 12 powers. The 12 powers are not separate from the God energy, Christ energy, whatever you would like, whatever is the word that works for you, but sort of a kind of like a prism takes regular white light into a rainbow. This is sort of us being able to look at these pieces in different, more spread out and able to use them. So strength is the power, this power that we're looking at this month. And from the revealing word, it's kind of this particular definition isn't quite as fiery, but it's got good stuff in it. So strength, the energy of God, freedom from weakness, stability of character, power to withstand temptation, capacity to accomplish. Strength is physical, mental, and spiritual. All strength originates in spirit, and the thought and word spiritually expressed being the manifestation. All strength originates in spirit. The thought and the word spiritually expressed being the manifestation. So we're not, I mean, you can include strength, bodybuilder strength, as being what we're talking about strength, but spiritual strength is deeper than that. And probably the most popular story to do with strength from the Bible is the story of David and Goliath. We've all heard of David and Goliath, right? I'm guessing, yeah. Kind of a popular story. In it, this is the New Revised Rachel version, because there's a lot of words if you read the actual story in the Bible. In it, David, who's the youngest son of Jesse, so his brothers go off to fight in a war, but he's the one who stays home and takes care of the sheep. And taking care of the sheep is not like for sissies. He has to like protect them from wolves and lions and bears and things like that, right? So he's a strong guy, but he's the youngest, so he's the one who gets to stay home, or has to stay home, while his brother's out at the front. Well, he goes out to the front to take some food and provisions, and while he's there, he hears Goliath, who is, you know, we think of Goliath as being a giant who's taunting them and saying, somebody needs to come out and fight me. Well, so there's two different, depending on which translation you use, Goliath is either 6 cubits in a span or 4 cubits in a span. So if it's 6, he's like 9 feet tall, which is definitely in a giant. But if it's 4, which is actually what shows up in some of the really early texts like that they found in the Nag Hammadi library, 4 cubits in a span is only like 6'6", which isn't really that giant. Though the average man at the time was about my height, so still like a foot taller, but not really, I don't know, not that big giant. But anyway, so his job was to go out and but he seemed like a giant. So David hears him taunting and he goes, I think I'm gonna go take him out. Which is kind of funny because they're like, well, you're just a kid. He says, I can do it. And the king's like, okay, fine. And he puts them all in his armor. And David says, you know, I don't know how to walk in this. I'm not used to being a soldier. I just need my slingshot and my rocks because that's how I fought the lions away from the sheep. And he goes out and, you know, uses his slingshot. and he takes out Goliath. And so there's some really interesting things in this story about strength. Yes, he had physical strength, obviously, but he also had a strength of understanding and knowing his purpose, right? He was able to stand up to his brothers who thought he was crazy for thinking that he could do anything, and he stood up and said to the king, I think that I'm called to do this. He had strength of knowing his truth, which is a different kind of strength. Now, some of you know I went to Italy this last fall, and the biggest reason I chose Italy, not just because it's where Gabriella is from, but because ever since I heard about Michelangelo's David statue, I wanted to see it. And guess what? It's in Italy, so that's where I wanted to go. And a couple interesting things about this piece of art, in case you don't know. It was considered, it was like the rock, the marble itself had been damaged. It had a weird gouge. Somebody had tried to make something out of it and put this big gouge in it. And so it was sort of kind of considered like a booby prize to the sculptors at the time. They're like, how are you going to make something out of this? It's not going to fall or break. But Michelangelo said, this is mine to do. And he had a tenacity, and he sat with it for a long time before he started figuring out what to do. And eventually he created the statue, which we've all probably seen before. You know, he managed to put that nice little twist in the torso, which made that gouge just go whoop. And it's still standing 500 years later. So I think he figured it out pretty good. But he showed that the spiritual power of tenacity, not only through that piece of work, but it takes a long time to carve a marble statue that's 15 feet tall. It takes a long time, right? And you come across trouble after trouble after trouble, but when you know something is yours to do, you call on your strength, your inner strength, and you do it. And so there's two versions of how David represents strength. And so strength can be courage, like David the character. Strength can be tenacity, represented by David the statue, Michelangelo. But strength, another part of strength is also finding balance and stability. And so I think about our Olympic athletes when I think about stability. I mean, I don't know if this year or past years, they, whether they're speed skating or they're doing all these fancy jumps on blades that are 3 millimeters wide. Pretty amazing, right? And the snowboarders and their skiers, they propel themselves off of cliffs of snow and do all sorts of crazy flips and stuff, and they land on their feet, usually. It's pretty amazing. And now they didn't always land on their feet. They probably landed on other body parts plenty of times, but they got up and kept at it. So there's tenacity for you once again. But there's that balance, and finding your balance is such an important part of strength. Because you can be, the strongest person in the world, but if you can't find your balance, it won't make any difference. And so, something has nothing to do with physical strength. Oh gosh, more than 10 years ago, a friend of mine was going through a really hard time. She was separated, but wasn't sure, and the kid, like custody and all that complicated stuff. This was a journey that took, oh gosh, at least 2 years to get all the way through. And it was really rough to go through all your, preconceived, your notions about how things should be and now they're not how we thought they were going to be and all of that stuff, right? It's rough. And all of that, she was just like, you know, Rachel, how can, and I'm like, look, in all of this, I'm at the storms of your life. I'm just here on the boat with you. I'll be your mast of the boat. You know, I'm standing here in the middle of the boat. You can just hold on. When you can't find your own balance, you'll be okay. And at some point along the way, we're going to trade places, and you're going to be my mast in the midst of my storm for me to hold on to. And so sometimes our strength comes, we find that balance and stability on our own. And sometimes we have those trusted people in our lives who are that mast for us so that we can find our balance in the midst of whatever our storm is or whatever our giant is that we're facing. I told you all that stuff about how some say that Goliath was 9 feet tall and some say it was 6 feet tall, because I think if we can make our giants less big, it helps us realize that we can conquer them. Our strength comes from our inner resources. And so we look at things like tenacity. It takes a lot of work to take an old habit and make it into a new one. I didn't read the daily word for today, but I thought it was interesting they talked about 12-step. That's definitely one way that people use to change an old habit into a new habit, a healthier habit, a stronger habit. But you know, we all have those bumps in lives, whether we're the life changing in our life situation, like my friend, or other changes in the way our life is working out. We have health challenges, uncertainty about the future. There's all sorts of things we have going on in our lives. We all have had the bumps. Maybe we're not in a bump right now, but eventually there'll probably be another bump. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. You know, it could be a bump, it could be a mountain, it could be a giant, however you want to call it. And so one of the bumps I came across in my life, I was working for Unity headquarters. It was awesome. And I was getting to take time to I could go take my classes at Unity Institute at the same time, and I was getting tuition assistance through my work, and so things were looking good. And then you remember how the economy all kind of went crazy about 10 years ago? Well, yeah. So then I got laid off because you got to balance the budget. I understand. And so I was bummed, and I went home, and I had my pity party or whatever you want to call it for that night. But it became clear to me very quickly that that wasn't going to get me where I needed to go. I mean, my tuition was still paid for the rest of the semester, so obviously I still needed to do that. And I was in the middle of a project that was really important to me. And if I just said, okay, well, see ya, it would have put people who mattered to me in a really rough place because they wouldn't have known what was going on. And so I just went to work the next day and did my job that I wasn't getting paid for anymore. And I went to work the next day, and that weekend we had people coming in for a planning. And so I did that, and I just did what I needed to do because that's what I knew was mine to do. And I stood in that place of strength knowing, you know what, I'm going to be where I need to be. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm not going to let down the people who rely on me. And it's all going to work out. To stand in strength and stand in that truth that, you know, there's more than enough of everything I need in this universe. And, you know, that job wasn't the only source of my income. Because of what I chose to do, the CEO at the time and his wife both handed me checks and said, here you go, help you over the hump. Because I stood in the truth of knowing I was going to do what was mine to do, whether you were paying me or not. And of course it all worked out. You know? I mean, it always does, right? Guess who ended up getting a contract to do the same work with a more flexible schedule and got paid more? It always works out, you know? But I could have, some people literally packed up their stuff from their office and left within an hour. The two people, there were 6 people who got laid up. The 2 people who grew up in Unity, both of us named Rachel, by the way. At least she stayed through the week and finished up and tied up all the loose ends. And they just never quite got rid of me. It took them like 2 or 3 more years to actually finally all the way get rid of me. And then I came back. I mean, it's just, that's how it is, right? But when you know it's yours to do, you have that strength to stand, and even though it's kind of painful, you just do what you need to do. Like Michelangelo said, this is mine to carve, this is mine to do, this work was mine to do. And what I did is not necessarily what's yours to do, but when we can move from fear and anxiety and worry, we can move into strength. We can move to truth. We can say, you know what, I don't need the armor to go slay this giant that's in my way. All I need is the tools that are mine, that I'm familiar with, that I know how to use, and knowing that, you know, God moves through me. That's all I need. That's all that David needed. That's all I need. So I invite you to call on this power or attribute of strength, represented by green, to keep you stable, to keep you focused, and to ignite courage.